South Park has been on television since 1997. That's nearly 3 decades, over 330 episodes. And if you've watched even a handful of them, you've probably had that weird moment where you're laughing and then suddenly realize, wait, this one's about me. Not about you personally. The show doesn't know who you are, but it knows how you think. It knows the things you get annoyed about, the stuff you pretend not to care about but actually do, and the opinions you hold that you've never really questioned. And somehow, over 25 plus years, Trey Parker and Matt Stone figured out how to hold up a mirror to basically everyone who watches their show and make them laugh at what they see. That's what makes South Park different from any other comedy on television. It's not just trying to be funny, it's trying to catch you off guard. And today we're going to look at how the show actually does that, how it's built, why it works on a level most people don't think about, and why, after all these years, it still manages to hit people right where they live. Before we get into it, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. It's free, takes a second, and it helps us keep making stuff like this. Alright, let's go. The first thing you need to understand about South Park is how it gets made, because this is the thing that makes everything else possible. Most animated shows take somewhere between 6 months and a full year to produce one episode. That's the standard. The Simpsons, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, all of them are working on episodes right now that you won't see until next year. By the time those episodes air, the thing they were joking about might not even be relevant anymore. South Park works completely differently. Since season 4, almost every regular episode has been written and fully produced in the same week it airs. Parker writes the script. Then, a whole team of animators, editors, and sound engineers pushes through 100 to 120 hours of work in a single week. They send the finished episode to Comedy Central on Wednesday, sometimes just hours before it hits the screen at 10 p.m. That sounds like chaos, and honestly, it kind of is. But it's also the reason the show feels alive in a way nothing else on television does. When something big happens in the real world on a Monday, South Park can have a fully produced episode responding to it by Wednesday. When Obama won the presidency in 2008, the show aired an episode the next night that used actual quotes from speeches given less than 24 hours earlier. No other animated show can touch that. And this speed isn't just a fun production fact. It's the engine that drives everything about how the show connects with viewers. Because when you watch an episode about something that just happened this week, something you were literally talking about with your friends yesterday, it doesn't feel like a TV show commenting on culture from a distance. It feels like the show is in the room with you. That closeness is what makes the comedy hit harder, and it's what makes viewers feel like the show actually gets them. But speed alone doesn't explain why the show lasts. Plenty of things are fast and forgettable. What keeps people coming back is something deeper, and it starts with a pretty simple idea. Parker and Stone call themselves equal opportunity offenders. That phrase gets thrown around a lot in comedy, but most people who say it don't actually follow through. South Park does. The idea is straightforward. If you're going to make fun of one group, you have to be willing to make fun of every group. No exceptions. No one is too powerful, too sympathetic, or too sacred to be a target. And here's why that matters to the average viewer. It builds trust. Think about it this way. When you watch a comedy show that only makes fun of certain people, you start to wonder what the show's agenda is. You start thinking about what they're not saying. Who are they protecting? What are they afraid of? That suspicion sits in the back of your mind, and it changes how you receive the jokes. You stop laughing freely because you're trying to figure out which team the writers are on. South Park removes that problem entirely. When you know the show will go after anyone and everyone, you can relax into it. You don't have to worry about whether the joke is secretly pushing you towards some opinion, because 5 minutes later the show will push just as hard in the opposite direction. There's a strange kind of freedom in that. You can laugh without feeling like you're being recruited. The season 8 episode, Douche and Turd, captures this perfectly. The school holds an election to pick a new mascot, and the only two options are a giant douche and a turd sandwich. Stan refuses to vote because both choices are terrible. The whole episode is basically saying that sometimes the options you're given are all bad, and pretending otherwise is ridiculous. It's not a liberal joke or a conservative joke, it's a joke about the whole system, and that's why it works, because every viewer, no matter where they fall on the spectrum, has felt exactly what Stan feels in that episode. That's the trick. When the show doesn't take sides, every viewer ends up seeing themselves in it. Which brings us to something even more interesting about how the show is written. One of the smartest things South Park ever did was make its main characters children. Not because kids are inherently funny, even though they can be, but because kids see the world the way the audience does. Think about how most adults operate. They've picked their positions. They know what they believe. They've got their political views, their social expectations, their way of doing things, and because they're locked into those positions, they can't really see how silly some of it looks from the outside. The four boys, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, don't have that problem. They haven't picked sides yet. They haven't committed to any ideology. They just observe the adults around them and react honestly. And most of the time, their honest reaction is confusion. Why are the grown-ups panicking about this? Why is everyone yelling at each other? Why does nobody seem to realize how dumb this is? That confusion is the audience's confusion too. When you watch the news and something makes no sense to you, when you see people online losing their minds over something that feels completely overblown, when adults around you behave in ways that seem irrational, you're having the same reaction those kids are having. The boys act as a filter. They cut through all the noise and performance and just point at the obvious thing nobody wants to say. And then there's Cartman, who serves a completely different purpose. Cartman isn't the audience's eyes. He's the audience's worst impulses turned up to maximum volume. Every selfish thought you've ever had, every cruel joke you laughed at privately, every entitled demand you wished you could make, Cartman says all of it out loud. He's what happens when you remove every filter a person has. And the reason he's funny isn't because the show agrees with him. It's because you recognize the tiny piece of yourself that thinks like him, and you get to laugh at how awful it looks when there's no restraint at all. The combination works beautifully. The boys show you how ridiculous the world is. Cartman shows you how ridiculous you could be if you stopped trying. And somewhere between those two things, every viewer finds the mirror the show is holding up. Now here's where it gets really clever, because the show doesn't just observe, it exaggerates. And the way it exaggerates is what actually makes people think. South Park's main comedy tool is taking a real idea, a real trend, a real belief, and stretching it until it snaps. The show doesn't just say, "This thing is silly," it says, "Okay, let's follow this thing all the way to its logical ending and see what happens." The Season 10 episode, Make Love Not Warcraft, is a perfect example. Gamers don't just play a lot in this episode, they physically decay. They gain massive amounts of weight. They stop showering. They stop leaving their chairs. The show takes the real habit of binge gaming and runs it so far past reality that it becomes grotesque, but also recognizable. Every gamer who watched that episode saw a distorted version of their own worst gaming sessions. It's not realistic, but it feels true, and that's why the episode won an Emmy. The 2023 special Not Suitable for Children does the same thing with influencer culture. Kids don't just like a popular drink in the episode. They treat it as a full social currency. Having the drink means you matter. Not having it means you're nobody. One kid fills an empty bottle with apple juice just to fake having it. The show takes the real pressure kids feel from social media marketing and pushes it until it becomes absurd. But again, not unrecognizable. Any parent who's had their kid beg for something because a YouTuber promoted it has lived a lighter version of that episode. This technique works on the viewer in a sneaky way. When you see a normal version of a behavior, you don't really question it. Everyone games. Everyone follows influencers. It's just what people do. But when South Park blows that behavior up to a cartoon extreme, suddenly you can see the shape of it. You can see where the behavior is heading if nobody ever pumps the brakes. The exaggeration doesn't distort reality, it reveals it. And the show applies this to literally everything. Political correctness gets turned into a character, PC Principal, who physically beats people up for saying the wrong words. Facebook addiction gets turned into Stan, literally getting sucked inside his computer like a Tron movie. Yelp reviewers become delusional food critics who believe they have power over restaurants. Whatever the topic, the method is the same. Find the real human behavior underneath, then crank the dial until the audience can't ignore it anymore. This is why viewers keep feeling like the show is speaking directly to them, because it's not commenting on abstract ideas, it's commenting on things you actually do. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. There's a pattern in South Park that most people feel before they consciously notice it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The adults are almost always wrong. Not just a little wrong, spectacularly wrong. They panic over the wrong things. They ignore the right things. They overreact to minor problems and completely miss major ones. They form mobs. They follow trends. They believe whatever they're told by whoever sounds the most confident. Randy Marsh is the best example. Stan's dad has slowly become one of the show's central characters, and he basically represents every embarrassing thing a grown adult can do. He's impulsive. He makes everything about himself. He jumps on whatever bandwagon is rolling by. He's held dozens of ridiculous jobs: geologist, pop star, cannabis farmer. Not because he's following a passion, but because he chases whatever feels exciting in the moment with zero self-awareness. And the thing about Randy is that he's not a villain. He's not evil. He's just a regular dad who keeps making things worse because he can't get out of his own way. That's what makes him hit so close to home for viewers. Most people don't see themselves as bad people, but if they're honest, they can probably think of a time they behaved exactly like Randy, overreacted to something, made a situation about themselves, or jumped on a trend without thinking it through. The show uses this pattern to create a specific feeling in the viewer. When you watch the adults in South Park lose their minds over something, and the kids just stand there looking confused, you're being asked a question without the show ever directly asking it. The question is, am I more like the adults or more like the kids? And most people want to believe they're like the kids. They want to believe they see through the nonsense. But the uncomfortable truth the show keeps poking at is that most of us, most of the time, are a lot more like Randy than we want to admit. That tension between who you think you are and who you actually are is what keeps people watching for 25 years. Why it still lands after all this time. A lot of comedy shows from 1997 don't hold up anymore. The references are dated, the style feels old, the jokes don't connect with how people think now. South Park has avoided that trap almost entirely, and the reason goes back to something we talked about earlier. Because the show produces episodes in less than a week, it never gets stuck commenting on yesterday's world. Every season feels like it belongs to the year it airs. The topics are fresh, the references are current, the cultural pressure points the show presses on are the same ones viewers are actually feeling in their daily lives right now. But there's a deeper reason the show stays relevant, and it's that the things South Park makes fun of don't actually change that much. The technology changes, the names change, the specific arguments change, but the human behavior underneath stays exactly the same. People panicked about Facebook in 2010. They panic about TikTok now. The platform is different, but the anxiety is identical. People argued about political correctness in 2015. They argue about it now, with different vocabulary, but the same frustrations. Parents worried about violent video games corrupting their kids in 2004. Now they worry about influencers corrupting their kids. The surface changes, the pattern doesn't. South Park figured this out a long time ago. The show isn't really about current events, even though it comments on them constantly. It's about the patterns of behavior that repeat every few years with a new coat of paint. Fear of change, tribal thinking, moral panics, hypocrisy, bandwagon jumping, the need to feel superior. These things were true about people in 1997, and they're true about people now. That's why an episode from 2004 can still make you laugh today, not because the specific topic aged well, but because the human flaw it's pointing at never went away. Here's what it all comes down to. South Park has lasted nearly 30 years, not because it's the most beautifully animated show, or because it has the most complex stories. It lasts because it does something most entertainment is afraid to do. It tells you that you're ridiculous. Not just the people you disagree with, not just the groups you don't belong to. You, your habits, your reactions, your blind spots, the things you take too seriously, the opinions you've never questioned, the ways you behave when you think nobody's paying attention. And it does this while making you laugh, which is the part that really matters. Because if the show just pointed at people and said, "You're dumb," nobody would watch it. Comedy is the delivery system. The joke gets past your defenses. You laugh first, and then a second later you realize what you just laughed at. And that little moment of recognition is the whole point. Parker and Stone have won Emmy Awards and a Peabody Award for this approach. At the Peabody ceremony, Parker asked, "What is socially responsible broadcasting? And how can artists provoke a call to change?" Which is a fancy way of saying the show is doing something on purpose. The jokes aren't random, they're aimed. With the show renewed through at least 2027, it's going to keep doing this. The topics will change because the world will change, but the approach won't. Parker and Stone will keep finding the thing everyone is doing, the behavior nobody is questioning, the assumption nobody is challenging, and they'll blow it up until you can't miss it. Somewhere in those 330 plus episodes, there's one that nails something about you, something about how you see the world, how you react to things, or how you behave when everyone around you is behaving the same way. You might have already seen it and laughed without realizing you were the joke, or maybe you haven't found it yet, but it's there. And the fact that you can laugh at it, that's the whole point of the show. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.